Welcome back, my little late night owls, to
What to Watch Now,
where we talk about what's streaming on Netflix right now. And in today's episode, we are talking about the Kirlian Frequency. Ooh. I had to be corrected about the name like 50 times from my boyfriend because he said I kept saying the Kirkland Frequency, which was making me laugh because that's the generic brand from Costco. And I just kept thinking like come to the Kirkland Frequency where you can buy all your spooky needs in bulk. So no, it is the Kirlian Frequency. It was created, directed, and written. I'm terrible at pronouncing names, so I'm not sure if this is Cristian or Cristian Ponce, but it was also written with Hernan Bengoya. Now, the Kirlian Frequency is amazing. You should definitely check it out, like, today now. These episodes range from anywhere from 8 to 11 minutes, similar like Love, Death, and Robots, which I just recently did an episode on. Another great show you should check out. So very bingeable, digestible. You can watch a little snippet and get what you want, and then maybe check back in later if you don't have time. But there's only 5 episodes, and it's all about Kirlian, the lost city in Argentina. It is told from the perspective of the local disc jockey, aka radio, and he narrates these spooky, creepy stories that get very dark, very Twilight Zone-y, definitely are never what they seem. And if you're going to talk about supernatural and weird events, they have fun with it, they're very creative, and they definitely do a lot of like, oh, you think it's this? No, it's that. It's amazing. It has a wonderful kind of Stranger Things, new wave type of soundtrack that definitely captures the mood. And my favorite part, honestly, is the animation. And this is why I think that they should totally, if they get funded or approved, I think they should just get approved, is the animation. Now, it's amazing. When I say simplistic, I'm not saying it as an insult, but it's simplistic enough that the way they creatively signal ideas kind of stands out more. And also, I think it does a great job representing what it's like experiencing supernatural events. A lot of people describe their supernatural events of like, they just saw the outline. It was just a blurry figure. It's like you only get so much of the picture without a lot of the details. And that coincides with what they're telling beautifully. But at the same time, I imagine it was probably easier to do this animation than having to come up with like full character designs, because a lot of the designs are very, maybe you just see the eyes, a little bit of the hair fringe. You don't get to see any of the facial features. It's very 2D animation. So I imagine it would make it more doable for them to continue and make a second, third, fourth, fifth. I mean, I would want a bunch of these because I love me spooky stories and spooky shows that have a lack of plot in them, where you can kind of keep going on and on. The general formula is perfect enough that you can have a lot more fun with the creative element to it. And I love that type of story. I mean, and that's why people, I think, love detective stories like Midsummer Murders. That's another great one. Miss Franny Fisher's detective agency, that's like my OG top favorite show. You should definitely go check that out. I'm trying to, by the way, on a side note, trying to figure out how I'm going to do a podcast on that because it's so good. Part of me wants to do separate episodes, but I don't think people would listen to that. I don't know. You can let me know what you think. I have a Twitter in the description below. But now, after you're done watching this, and you're probably going to finish it like I did and be like, damn, there's only 5 episodes. More! I want more! The way you can get your fix, and also a great comparison, would be John E.L. Tenney's podcast called Realm of the Weird. A little bit of background on John. He's a wonderful guy. If you know anything about me, you know I have another podcast with my partner titled Mystery Storytime Podcast, so you should definitely go check that out. So we like to talk about paranormal stuff, all that fun kind of ghost stories, demon stories, stuff like that. And along our journey, we've come to learn about other paranormal investigators and stuff like that. But one person that's really big in the community is John E.L. Tenney. You can definitely think of it, I said it as kind of a half joke, but you can definitely think of him as like Indiana Jones in that way, because he's incredibly knowledgeable. I mean, he's even had firsthand experiences being a part of like an exorcism, like officiated by the Vatican. Like, the dude is in deep, and he's very educated. I don't think he's been to like ghost type of investigations, but he primarily is just incredibly intelligent, and he helps people with their weird problems. And along the way, he's collected these short podcasts. They're only like 10 minutes long. He's been doing the podcast for 7 years. He does it periodically, because not because he's lazy or anything like that. I mean, he's got so much on his plate, but rather his stories, when he puts them on the podcast, they truly are the weirdest of the weird. You will be hooked from beginning to end. I mean, one time he told a whole story where, from what it seemed, he just went to a diner. Nothing was weird about it. He even mentions at the very end of the story, you'll notice nothing was weird about what I said. But in fact, that diner doesn't exist. And the whole spookiness of his experience is like he's trying to figure out what happened to him. And this is completely real. It's so interesting. That's why there's not a ton of them. Because, like, I mean, many ghost investigators will say that certain, like, the type of events we're used to seeing in movies are actually much more rare to experience. Like, you rarely even see just a straight up, like, ghost, like, see it as a physical, tangible entity. So I just think it's a great comparison if you like the Kirlian frequency and you kind of want to go off on a little bit of a, you know how they call them K-holes, I guess, a pee-hole? No, not a pee-hole, like paranormal. An S-hole? Oh, all the holes sound gross. You get what I'm saying. You want to go down the rabbit hole. Well, anyways, before I go into, like, going about the episodes and having fun like I normally do talking about them, I just want to say, please go check this out. You want to support it, because I would definitely say, and I say this with a complete compliment, this reminds me the most of kind of almost like YouTube content, in the sense that I can't even believe it got made. In this day and age, no one wants to make anything unless the pitch will draw on the audience enough. They're afraid to try anything new. It's a lot of repetitive ideas, repetitive, like, person like it wants to kill himself, but then he falls in love, and then he changes his mind, and maybe there's a twist ending, but overall a lot of things are repeated. So rarely do you get something that's so weird. I mean, even to do animation and not have a big enough pool as a person but still want to put it out there nonetheless, that's huge. I can't even believe Netflix released it. So this is the type of stuff we want. After you experience it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But this is the type of stuff we beg for creatively, and it's being given to us. So feel free to go support it so more stuff like this can get made, for sure. And then I'm trying to see what else I wrote. Oh, I just wanted to say the last thing I wanted to write in my notes was just that. Just be warned that this is dark. There are moments that will make you sad. And there's something, I think what stands out about it, above like your typical fun ghost story type thing, is it kind of has a grim tales. Is it grim tales and fairies? Do you know what I'm talking about? The grim stories where they're the darker versions of the fairy tales. It's very dark and Twilight Zone-y, and a lot goes on. Sometimes they just sprinkle in stuff as like a joke, like what you'll see when I'm talking about the first podcast. So it's amazing in that way, is all I'm saying. So the first episode is called April Nation. And this is kind of when we get introduced to our disc jockey. He just has these ominous white Zodiac killer glasses, and he's just a black shadow. And he's kind of just, you kind of get the idea of what he's about. He treats his talking about the supernatural and Kirlian is almost like a casual thing, but it's still, the vibe I get is that he has his podcast, but not many people, or not podcast, I'm so sorry, radio show, but not a lot of people maybe fully believe what he's talking about. He's a little bit on the fringe, but sometimes he talks about information as if it's like the weather report, which I love. So again, that's very unique, the way they're going about giving the tone of the story, which I loved. By the way, also, this is another side note, I watched the English dub version, which I highly recommend if you're not into subtitles. Not that I'm against, subtitles and stuff like that, but sometimes when you're someone like me who watches a lot of like foreign stuff, it gets exhausting to read all the time, and sometimes you just want to have it be in your language. It's just easier to digest. And I thought the English speaker they got for the voices, especially the disc jockey, really resonated with the dark tone of it all. But, I mean, you can watch it in Spanish, like, go for that too. That's awesome as well. Anyways, so I'm just saying, I'm speaking from someone who watched the dubbed version. So, he starts off in the beginning, we get introduced to the disc jockey, and he is talking about a ghost named Little Manuel Ramirez, and that apparently he had been mysteriously murdered, or something along the lines, 20 years ago to the day. And be warned that he's out there, And we get a little like spinning circle around a little boy that's features get blocked out by a skeleton. It's so cool looking. And he, he will see you and want to engage with you and then blame you for his death, kind of like stuck on a loop. And he's just saying, like, don't talk to them, whatever, just 411, he's out there, just don't communicate with him at all, or this is what's going to happen to you casually. But anyways, going on, we have a special guest into our radio today. And again, this is where it gets really dark. This man is tied up and being held at gunpoint by our disc jockeys, so he seems kind of crazy. And the guy is trying to subtly warn people that he's being tied up and kidnapped, but the disc jockey is cutting him off perfectly and continuing his kind of almost investigation. He explains and the guy keeps saying, like, I don't know what you want, my family was gonna know I'm missing, blah, blah, blah. But we learned through the interview that this man was sent to be brought in to do kind of some measurements and stuff of the local factory or something along the lines for Kirlian. But when he says that, the disc jockey makes a great point. You've been here for 3 weeks. It takes 3 weeks to do that. And he learns that he had kind of cut off some mailings or mail, whatever, that the man is clearly lying, that this information and warnings he gives about Kirlian is being sent to the top government. And apparently, it's kind of we get from the story is that it's actually rather hard to get to Kirlian, that it's somehow almost impossible mysteriously. And for this man to put out this information there, they don't want anybody coming by, and it kind of leaves you with this tone of like, why? Do you want people to get hurt? Not at all. You just kind of get the vibe as you start to experience this episode in particular that a lot of the residents are paranormal or supernatural, and that's normal and okay, just fine. And they kind of want to live in their spooky little town unharmed. It's basically Halloween Town, the Disney movie. So he's holding him at his gunpoint, and it gets revealed by the end of the episode that he was particularly tying him up, not only because he wanted to get that information, but that we see a woman who looks like just a random shadow turn into a werewolf and then attack him, which makes our guest a werewolf. He turns into a werewolf and he gets shot in the head by the DJ defending himself. And the ending is my favorite part. So he ends it kind of just saying like, oh, don't worry, there was an incident, but we were rescued by our local police officer. And he's kind of giving this false story out there when in reality, he shot some random guy who just happened to be turned into a werewolf in the head, and that he's going to bury the person himself. And we get a couple reveals in this moment, and a great way to set the tone of the whole show itself. Because when he starts to tell the story, you see the side profile of him for once, and you realize you can see through his mouth. This is one of the first great reveals. And you realize it's never fully confirmed, but you kind of get the idea that maybe he is like a zombie or some sort of undead or skeleton, something. Because with all this paranormal stuff going on and him being an advocate and holes being in his mouth, let's just say you see the profiles of other characters on the show, and that isn't the case. So the disc jockey ends up burying the body, and as he's burying the body, the little Manuel pops up, and he just goes like, he yells at the little boy, and he's like, get the fuck out of here. And the little ghost kid gives him a middle finger, like, screw you. So I love that funny, goofy tone of it all. And also, I love moments in the show that really create this vibe when we just hear the beautiful soundtrack going on, thumping and pulsating and creating this almost never-ending tension while you feel kind of almost happy and amped up at the same time. And they sometimes will choose to just do subtitles. So you get these subtitles of them talking and an incident going on, and you get an idea of what's going on, but the music is going on and we understand that the general public isn't being told this stuff. Example, in this first one, they say they went off the air for a full minute, and you get to then see the animation and the discussion between the two of them, the werewolf, the man turning into the werewolf, and the disc jockey, about what's happening in that second, and the reveal while they're off the air, all with subtitles. So he's burying this body, he tells the little ghost boy to fuck off, and then he sees the girl who is got a wolf. I think it's either a wolf with a girl's shadow or a girl with a wolf's shadow. Great little way to hint at that. And he just kind of casually waves to her. So you get the idea of like him saying, "Don't worry, girl, your secret will not be revealed." Like, "Hey, what's up, local resident werewolf? We're cool with each other." So that already sets a funny but dark tone, mystery, weirdness. It's got so much going on. It's very unique. Anyways, we go forward into the second episode, Monsters of the Night. Now, this is all from kind of a call-in. Again, great way that they're creative and don't limit themselves. Some people call into a radio show and tell their story. She explains she's a woman that hears her friend has gotten hurt in a car accident, so she races off to the hospital, and she has to cut through Kirlian, which she hadn't done before, so she's not a resident there. Along the way, she almost gets kind of run off the road by these kids on a motorcycle. I don't know if they're kids or maybe like just some guys. She didn't say the age, but they have almost green eyes, she expresses. Now, as she's going to the hotel, she's like living her life or whatever, she runs across the guys again. And this is when she starts to kind of be harassed by them, and we get kind of an idea of who she is as a character. And this is really important. I think that always sets the tone for any spooky movie, is you want to like the character or understand the character and their motives, and either root for them or watch them die horribly. Isn't that weird? But in her case, she lets the tone be out that she is tough, she will not be intimidated. She might be a woman alone traveling, but she can make anything happen. She's very capable. And we see this a couple times during the story. So she ignores them and everything, but she's in her hotel and she's because her car breaks down along this way in Kirlian, she has to stay the night before she can go to the hospital and check on her friend and find out what the situation is really. And she's washing her clothes or whatever because she ran out of the house without even grabbing her purse. And I don't even know how she's paying for this hotel, I might add. And this mysterious green smog, goes into her room. She tries to tell her neighbor, an old man, "Can you please stop that? You're stinking up my room." And he talks about the monsters. And she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about, but can you stop it?" She creatively finds a way to dump some ice in like a ventilation system or whatever, which basically thwarts his green smoke. But unfortunately, to her horror, and I don't even know if she fully connects this, but this green stink clearly was some sort of shield or barrier, because the same biker kind of gang we saw before shows up again. And they're inside doing something to him. You hear him screaming, you hear him frightened, and when she goes to help the old man, one of them tells her to go back inside. This is when she realizes their eyes, it wasn't a reflection. They actually are green. And that when he tells her to go inside, it doesn't feel so much as a threat, but rather a kindness he's doing her amongst the monsters. That he's saying, "You don't want to get hurt, all you have to do is stay inside and you'll be okay, and then you can leave in the morning. Just stay inside, please." And so she does go back inside until a woman she had encountered earlier that had helped her with the whole car breaking down situation is getting hurt, being taken away by these creatures. Now, coincidentally, at the same time, she unfortunately has gotten a phone call being told her friend that was in the car accident has unfortunately passed. So she's devastated. She starts to contemplate the idea, even through all her, toughness and everything, she starts to contemplate, well, what am I doing alive? What am I doing here? What's the point? I kind of get the vibe who these guys are. I understand they're most likely vampires. I'm afraid to die. And she's really contemplating the dark stuff. I'm skimming over it, but it's beautifully brought in and goes for much longer how she's expressing herself. So in a both a hero moment to help this innocent woman and also maybe get a potential to be mortal, she asks them to let her go and then to if he'll bite her. And he does at first be like, "You don't want this," but he says, "Okay, I'll bite you if you really want it." But he even tells her, "Oh, I'm not a vampire. You guys are so stupid. I'm not what you think." And this is where it gets really weird. Unfortunately, the woman who was being harassed did get taken. We can assume she probably got eaten or died or something. But instead of vampires, they become these enormous, giant mosquito fly-like bugs. It's so gross and weird. And she's only saved from being potentially bitten by this temptation, or the temptation for the monster was like pumped to bite her, because the old man had stunk up her clothes, and that green stink pushed away the monsters. It was like she got close to death, just close enough with the idea of it. And then she realized, oh wait, what the fuck am I doing? I gotta pull away from this. I think we've all been there in a dark moment in our life, and I can refer to, like, you can go to the extremes, like wanting to take your own life, or just like you're in a moment where you think a terribleness that's like befallen you is forever. And it's so funny how after we get out of that moment, we're like, I can't believe I ever went there, or like, holy shit, like, that is the opposite of how I feel now. That truly was but a second of my emotions, and I could have gotten really caught up in the extreme feelings. So I think that's like a great little metaphor there. And she ends up leaving the town, and even the disc jockey kind of hints at saying, like, I hope you're doing okay, like, I hope you're safe wherever you go. Then we have episode number 3, A New Color. Now this one is really creepy and dark, but we get kind of another interview-esque. Turns out that this disc jockey actually personally knows this person. She's an older woman, and she's complaining about kids doing graffiti around the local neighborhood. Apparently, the disc jockey and her are on the local, like, committee or whatever. Again, very ominous. You wonder if it's a committee open to the public or another kind of committee. Well, anyways, they complain about these kids. But these kids, who we kind of, at first I thought it was like a weird ghost thing, because sometimes the animation alludes to that type of stuff, but we get the idea that in the very beginning, a kid broke into his disc jockey house and stole a particular book. Looks like an occult book, potentially, because even though she makes it seem like she's just annoyed of the kids in the neighborhood harassing her and putting graffiti everywhere, and she demands that he does something about it, these kids are drawing kind of occult-like symbols, right? So you think, ooh, what are these dark, spooky kids doing? At one point, even one of the kids, one of the graffiti kids, calls in saying, like, we have a right to know and a right to protect. And then we get the horrifying twist. This is where it gets really Grimm's fairy tale type-esque thing. The woman who's complaining on the phone is like, I'm going to take care of it myself. And her friends come out of the house, and they turn into, you kind of get the idea immediately that they are witches, and that they start cursing these children. One is a little girl turned into a giant tree, which is horrifying and scary looking, and she turns the 2 other children into rats, and she even goes as far as eating one of the rats, like, alive. I mean, it's disgusting. And this is all while the crazy rave music is playing and everything like that. And what's really fun and cool about the end of it is, even though this horrifying moment has happened to these children, one of the children got turned into kind of like, I don't know, like a creature, like a mutated creature. And even though they have died, or not died, I'm sorry, they have mutated, they are still continuing to put up the graffiti. And you realize that this graffiti wasn't random, and they weren't performing anything. They, in fact, were trying to protect themselves. They sensed these witches were evil, and they were looking up for something to protect themselves. And even, it's kind of like a little weird mini war, which honestly, if you wanted to write it from a more like really serious perspective, not serious like Lord of the Flies, but serious in the sense of like, you give the children's perspective importance instead of it. I feel like when kids are made to be seen as serious in a role, it's always quickly like, oh, you little kids, get out of my way. A lot of cliche lines you're preparing for. And I would love a story where there's some serious kids trying to fight witches. I mean, I know there's the witches, but even that's like a little corny. That has some cliche lines because kids are considered kids. You know what I mean? But wouldn't that be cool if there was like Children of the Corn, there was only kids, and then maybe randomly witches, and they have to defend themselves? That'd be so cool. Come on, Netflix, I'm giving you ideas. So when they're, I love that the monster in the end, the kid monster, was like, I'm still going to fight for this cause. This will not stop me. This is bigger than me. Again, a lot of layers going on in Kirlian. Then we get a fun Christmas episode, The King of Christmas. Now this one's really funny because basically the DJ opens up by saying that for whatever reason everyone's calendar is now missing 8 months, and that they think it's basically setting the tone that the world is going to end in April. So the disc jockey takes this as kind of a the world's gonna end sort of thing. And he decides, well, if the world's gonna end, why don't we celebrate Christmas early? Because we ain't gonna get it this year. So he wants to spend the whole day, instead of talking about dark stories like he normally does, we've gotten a flavor, a taste of that so far, he wants to talk about happy stories. But he keeps getting these prank phone calls. And it's kind of great because some of the stories are intertwined with actual distressed calls, because they get a lot of distressed calls, which I thought was funny that he kept hanging up and he was like, he didn't take those stories as pranks. He just took them as like, nope, only happy calls today. Your troubles will have to wait. And so it's mixed with some real distressed calls, and you kind of are wondering if certain people didn't make it. And then other ones are kind of like prank phone calls, because they are basically stories being told as if they are real, but they are the retellings of certain Stephen King novels, which is really funny. And eventually he's so pissed by all this prank phone calling, we get to see him being angry for once, because, he had an intention and it's not happening, and he's frustrated with it. So we see him put on the disc jockey, keep in mind, this weird, hazard suit. And we see him go down to the basement, a cavernous cave, while all this drama is happening. We're getting a flavor of this. And he's playing a long song. And he goes down there, and this is when we get kind of almost a weird snippet of how the town works and potentially the source to all its weirdness. And it leaves you with so many questions, because when he goes down there, he sees this almost H.P. Lovecraft creepy tentacle monster with one giant eye holding a Stephen King novel or whatever. And he has a little bickerment with it, where he says, I know you're the one prank phone calling. Stop prank phone calling me. Don't worry. I got rid of that guy in the first episode. I got rid of that government guy, so no one's going to come. No one's going to bother you. You're safe. And then he realizes, and again, when he says you're safe, and he also mentions about the monster being potentially the source to all the weirdness in this town. Which, by the way, makes me wonder how, if he has got this thing in his basement, maybe, and this is just a theory, a game theory. No, just kidding. This is just a theory, but what if this monster somehow exists in this town, is causing all this weirdness? Everybody in their supernatural event is kind of like a side effect from the leaking of this weirdness. And he found this monster. Maybe he died for whatever reason, and it brought him back to life, and he's kind of protecting it. And, in a way, the monster's giving him a job, but I think he's doing a little bit out of kindness, a little bit out of hey, I owe you, you saved my life. And he's not unaware, but he's giving people an advantage by helping them out, protecting them in this difficult circumstances. Because sometimes it's a friendly werewolf, and sometimes it's a bunch of mosquito gang kids trying to murder you, so you never know. Well, he talks to the monster, and it's a cute moment, because he realizes the monster's lonely, and he's like, this song's a particularly long one. If you want me to sit down, I'll stay, and I'll keep you company. So it's very cute, nice little thing. But the last one I want to talk about, an old man and dog. This is the saddest and darkest one. I might have to skim over this because it kind of made me so sad. So a person calls in or tells a story, so sad and dark. And he tells a story where he explains that he used to see this old man, and they became friends over time. He was an old man who grabbed him kind of from outside his house's window and explains, "Can you please give me a drink of water? I'm so thirsty." He does live with other people, many people, in fact, his daughters-in-laws and stuff like that. But they're usually gone all day, either at work or other people's houses, because they are either busy with their lives or they just hate him. In fact, he expresses how much his daughter-in-laws hate him. But he cannot get unfortunately, his wheelchair through the kitchen open way, which is so sad. I would change that in a second for anybody. But he just can't go and get water for himself. So that's why he goes in and gets some water. And in fact, every day, this person telling the story goes in and gives him water and just kind of hangs out with the old guy. Just kind of became a friend over time. It took a little while, a couple weeks of them having this, before he tells him the story of the old man. He asks this guy, "Can you please do me a favor?" And he goes, "Well, what's the favor?" He asks him to kill the neighbor's dog. I know. Weird, right? He explains that this neighbor's dog is barking incessantly to the point that it's driving him crazy. And it's kind of funny because he tells the story about how scary and dark and dangerous this dog is. But when the person who's telling the story goes and checks it out, it turns out that the dog is just, your run-of-the-mill little dog, nothing crazy about it. But it kind of gives you a perspective, because he even talks about how the old man can't look around the window and vice versa, to the dog can't look around and see him. He's kind of speculating if both people, both the dog and the person, view the worst of each other and allowing their imagination to get the better of them. Really, again, a great personification of what it means to be into spooky stories and paranormal encounters. And as he's complaining about this dog situation, it gets kind of dark because he wants him to kill this dog. But what happens is the person who decides, okay, this old man is asking and requesting this so much, so intensely, that I'll do him the favor. I'll go see what this dog's about, and I'm not going to kill him, but I'm going to scare him off. I'm going to get him off of the old man's back by just getting him to be quiet. But something weird kind of happens. He goes down this, trippy hypnotic stage, and he says he can't explain what happens. When he looks in the dog's eyes, who he was going to scare, just kind of get him to get back and be a little quiet, he said he suddenly knew everything there was about Kirlian, in the sense that he knew that there was something bad in the old man's house. He knew that there were bad things out there in the night. He knew they were all hiding and waiting their turn, and that the stories that he heard on the radio were not fake, but maybe possibly real, and he had just had some sort of awakening in this moment. He decides, though, unfortunately, to stop seeing the old man. And he eventually does see him again, though, and the old man looks worse for wear. It's really sad. And he tells a story explaining that the barking has gotten way worse. Keep in mind, the guy goes in and gives him water, they kind of catch up. It's kind of like a, sorry I ditched you kind of type of thing. And he tells him the barking's worse than ever. It's 24/7, and it's killing him. But he said one day, the dog broke out of the fence and came to the old man to the window. And the barking that had gone on and got worse and worse, had gone from barking to a voice that was speaking directly to the man. And when the dog came to him and was screaming, he told him that he was going to die, that he was not safe, that he had heard his daughter-in-laws talking and they had planned to kill him. And he gave him this warning, but unfortunately the neighbors came by and took the dog back to their yard. And when the old man begged the person telling the story to take him with him and get him out, I think he feels guilty and bad about this circumstance. And I think in any circumstance, we'd like to believe we do the right thing and rescue this person. But then it becomes like, well, now you're taking care of this old man that you honestly just kind of got to know out of feeling bad he couldn't get water. It doesn't mean he doesn't deserve that kindness. I'm just talking on a realistic note, like, would you do that? Would you then take on that gravity? Because that is a lot to take on. I mean, that's why the idea of even just having your own children is a decision. So he unfortunately decides not to help the old man, and that's the last he saw of him. He goes back eventually to check up on the old man again, see how he's doing, and unfortunately I remember, he read in the newspaper that the old man had died. Unfortunately, though, they say he died from falling down the stairs. It was just an accident, or like off the porch or something like that. But he knows that's not true, because the old man couldn't even get through the hallway in the kitchen area. So he wouldn't have been able to get out and go, and he wouldn't have been able to trip, considering he was in a wheelchair. So when he goes to visit and see what's going on, the daughter-in-laws seem much happier. The house is now filled instead of empty. They're all pumped he's basically dead, which is really dark. And think about, they're not saying that, but that's kind of the vibe you get. When he goes to check on the neighbors, they unfortunately put the dog down because he was barking so much, which is even sadder because we learned he was trying to warn them. And he's left walking away from a circumstance that he's like, I know it's illegal, I know it's bad, but obviously I can't tell anyone about it, and I'm just aware. And now I'm suddenly aware that your radio show is real and everything. And I think that kind of perfectly sums up the different sides of what Kirlian is. And I can just see one amazing story done after the other. It sometimes it's fun, and it's silly to think of telling a little ghost boy to fuck off and wave to a werewolf. but sometimes you see victims being taken by monsters, or even like the spookiness of, like, clearly this old man was killed by his own family, humans, and the darkest part was that there was some truth and warning for some weird unknown reason, and it got squished out. Like, it was inevitable, it was going to happen. Actually, coincidentally, I know this is not fully related, but we actually talked in our latest podcast on Mystery Story Time about banshees, and the idea of the podcast is we tell each other a story that the other one doesn't know about. So my boyfriend shared the story of banshees and about the idea that they are supposed to come from Ireland, and there's a lot of background lore of, like, do they come from only Ireland? Do they only go to people Ireland? Do they only talk to people with certain predominant Irish last names? But the idea behind banshees is they come and they warn you about your death or someone close to you's death. And I couldn't help but think about this story he told me and this episode and think, you know, this dog was in a way its own banshee. Banshees are supposed to come over 3 nights, and the first night only you hear this screaming. The second time, everyone else in your family will, and the third night you won't even really fully make it. Like, the screaming's kind of the marking of your death, so to speak, or someone else's death. And it just kind of makes me wonder, because another thing about the banshees that was really interesting is sometimes banshees are there to help you and warn you, and sometimes the banshees are there to kill you, that the screaming is supposed to be so bad and so incessant you end up trying to do whatever you can to stop it and end up murdering yourself. Meanwhile, no one else can hear the screams you're hearing. So very spooky. It's kind of similar to how the dog had worn out the old man to the point that maybe he wasn't able to defend himself or do anything about the circumstance of him dying. But then at the same note, he was trying to warn him. So it's kind of like, in a way, a beautiful one and the same when it comes to the banshee idea. So just some food for thought. Again, if you like these type of conversations, we have that other podcast, Mystery Storytime podcast, you can definitely check out. But either way, like I said, amazing animation, amazing soundtrack, great stories, and everything else in between. You should for sure check it out. I hope and beg there's a second and third and so on season, because I for sure loved it. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. Give it a 5-star review on iTunes if you enjoyed it. It really helps out. And overall, I just love talking about this shit with you guys so much. So have a beautiful day. I love you in the most platonic way possible.